Welcome back, Power Platform Junkies, to another episode. So today we're going to look at how you can be able to build a report using Power BI. This report is going to look at the Contoso retail sales performance breakdown so that you can be able to look at the sales performance for this specific company. So for an example, looking at the total revenue generated, revenue by specific customers and all of those things. So we're going to look at how you can be able to build that using Power BI. So without wasting any time, let's head over to my screen and actually start building the report. On my device, we're on Power BI desktop so that we can be able to use it to build this report. We are going to use the dataset that Contoso gave us, which is the dataset for sales, and also they have a dimension table that looks at the breakdown of the months, the quarters, and also the number of months as well across their sales performance. So we're going to look at that and we're going to ingest that data inside of the Power BI desktop, and then we can be able to use the canvas to build out our visual. So to get our data inside of this canvas, we are going to go at the top on the ribbon bar, select Get Data. There's a list of options that are available to us to be able to import our data from. So we can import the data from an Excel workbook, we can import the data from a Power BI semantic model, or we can import it from a Dataverse table. Like for an example, if you have a Power App that has Dataverse as its data source and you want to visualize that data. But in our case, we're going to use a CSV file that was provided by Contoso Retails. So once we selected text or CSV, we're going to select exported sales, which is the dataset we're going to use today. And then we're going to go back again to actually import some of the other data that we have, which is the dimension table. But before we do that, we need to do a few things here. So in our case right now, we have the preview of the data, and this preview of the data gives us an insight or an idea, a general idea of how we want to visualize our data. Like for an example, we have sales that might be our revenue or total revenue based off of the unit price or the order quantity as well. And we might want to visualize the data based off of the customer name and how much revenue they've generated based off of the sales and so forth. But before we load this data, we need to do a few transformations. So I'm going to select transform data. The reason why I'm doing that, which has opened the Power Query editor inside of Power BI desktop, is because our sales column here is actually pulled in from the CSV file as a text column. That's not what we want. We actually want to visualize the values from that column in a numerical manner. And also another thing that's happening is the values there are actually, like for an example, the first one is 881.40. Now, I don't know whether it's my device or my settings on my device, but it seems like Power BI desktop, when I try to convert this into a decimal, actually gives me an error and says, hey, this is not working, or this conversion from text to this value is not working because you have a character that is not recognizable. So in our case, we're going to firstly need to change I would say the decimal placeholder, which is the period or the full stop there, into a comma. So for us to be able to do that, we can select or right click, select the drop down option that is next to the column itself, or that seems that's not going to work, or we can just right click on the column itself or the column name itself, and then in this case we select replace values. When you select replace values, we want to find the period or the full stop and replace it with a comma, and then we're going to select OK. That's fine. Now we can again right click, so I can do this by right clicking, or I can use the transform option here at the top. But in this case, I'm just going to keep it simple and use the right click. Then once I've selected I've right clicked on the column, the next thing that I need to do is to actually transform this, change the type actually. Change the data type of the column from a text to a decimal number, and that should work properly. Let's do the same thing for unit price because we might use it. So I have to right click on unit price, replace values, replace the period with a comma, and then I'm going to select OK, and then right click again, all I need to do now is to change the data type into a decimal number because we want to use it a bit later on. And I think that is all that we're going to need with the numbers. There's nothing else. Hopefully we're not going to need anything else. But if we do, we can always come back to actually transform this data. Okay, once we've done with our changes, we would have to select close and apply, which will then apply the changes that we've just made to our data model or to our data set that we've just done. Okay, now we've gotten that out of the way, let's actually start building out some visuals. But before we do that, there's that data set that I spoke about earlier on. So let's get that in here. So we're going to get data, text or CSV file, and it's the dimension month table that we want to put it in. So we're going to have like the month ID, the month name, the quarter, and the quarter name or quarter number for an example. So in this case, you can see, for an example, if you can actually catch this, tell me if you caught this at first glance, but I may have made my columns switch places. So quarter name was supposed to be here and quarter ID was supposed to be this side. But nonetheless, since we know that's how it looks like right now as we're importing the data, we should be able to proceed with the demo. So we select load data. This will load that data that we need. Okay. Now, before we build visuals, we want to allow Contoso retails to be able to see the total number of orders that they're receiving for the different products that they actually offer. So to do that, we need to create a new measure. To do that, we can right-click on the name of the table we're going to create a new measure, which is the sales table. Select new measure, and we name this measure. Instead of it being measure, we're just going to say orders because we want to see the total number of orders. And to get the total number of orders, we can use the count function, which will just count the number of orders based off of the order number, for an example, because the order number is the unique identifier of each order in this case. Then if we're okay with that, we just select the check mark. That creates our measure that we can be able to use now to actually build out these visuals. Let's actually build the visuals. So the first one is to actually see the total number of orders. So how we're going to do that, we're going to go to the visualizations tab and then select card. And the card one allows us to just give us like totals of, let's say, a total revenue, total number of orders, and so forth if we want that. So we're going to choose the card visual and then go to the data tab and select our measure there. You can actually see the number of orders being pulled in. Now I could leave it like this, but to me this is not really user friendly. I want my report to actually be visual rich and I want it to look good. So for me to do that, I'm just going to select the visual again, go back to the visualizations tab and select the format your visual option, go to general and expand the effects, and then just toggle on visual border and toggle on the shadow, and then expand visual border and change the rounded corners from 0 to 15 pixels. I love using rounded corners for anything I built, even with apps, like my buttons on the apps actually have rounded corners as well. I don't know if that's how it is for you guys as well. So I have my total orders. That actually looks pretty neat. It looks nice now. It's like popping out. Now the next thing is to actually be able to showcase the total revenue generated, which is the next visual that we're going to build. And again, you guessed it, the total revenue, we're going to use a card visual. So I'm just going to add it, but I would love to copy and paste it, but I'm just going to add it for interest's sake. Add the card visual again, and then this time for the card visual, what I'm going to do is, instead of selecting orders, I'm going to select sales, right? And the sales one actually shows me the sum of sales, in this case, the total or the sum of the sales that were actually generated based off of all of the purchases that were made by customers using their orders, right? And again, we need to make this look a little bit prettier. So we're going to go to the visualizations tab, select format your visual, go to effects, just toggle these guys on and change the rounded corners from 0 to 15 pixels and this actually looks a little bit nicer. But because we're dealing with money here, I think what we can try to do is to actually see if we can be able to change this instead of just being a number, which actually make it into a currency. Let's actually explore this together. So let's see if we can be able to find it. So in this case, it's not under category labels. I wonder where it could be, for an example. So I think we can be able to find it under data format, because we want to format the data that is coming from sum of sales. And the format options, it seems it's empty, so we're going to change it and we're going to make it a currency, for an example. Oh wow, it actually chose South African rands as the currency. I'm inclined to change this, so I'm going to change this and just put it into dollars just for interest's sake, because I kind of like how the dollars actually look on a visual. But obviously you can choose the currency of your liking. So I need to find the dollars again. Let's see if we can find the dollars. If we don't, we just abandon it and leave it alone. Okay, for the interest of time, we're just going to carry on with the demo. Okay, so we have another card visual. So I'm just going to try to make it a bit smaller here as well. And I'm going to try to make this guy a bit smaller as well. Okay, that's fine. I'm just going to leave it like that. Now we want to look at the average unit price and what is the minimum and what's the maximum, and do we have a median around the unit price. So for us to be able to do that and visualize that for Contorso, what we need to do is to actually add a gauge visual. So the gauge visual will allow us to actually gauge, like you'll be able to see the minimum unit price and you will see the maximum unit price, and you will see which product, or what's the most reoccurring or median unit price that's being used within the orders or within the sales that we actually have. I don't know if I'm explaining that correctly, but let me know on the comment section if that's actually how you actually explain this as you see this visual as we're building it out. Okay, so for the average unit price, what we need to do firstly is to get the value. So the value is going to be unit price. Obviously we're using unit price, remember I said let's use unit price. So in this case, I'm just going to drag unit price under the value part of this and change it from being its sum to average. So we're looking at the average unit price. And then again, I'm just going to drag the minimum value of unit price to minimum value, the maximum value of the unit price to maximum, if I'm not mistaken. And then I'm going to change that, instead of being sum of unit price, to maximum, because we're looking at the maximum value of the unit price. Change that into minimum, because we're looking at the minimum value of the unit price. Right, and we actually have that proper. Now we just need to make it look pretty, just like the rest of these guys. So you're gonna go back to the visual, select format your visual, then go to general. Firstly, go to the effects, toggle the visual border on, toggle the shadow on, and make sure that we add rounded corners to have that unified look with everything here. Okay, and then we're gonna do a little bit of extra editing. So we're gonna look at the title, and we just need to remove a few things on the text because it doesn't look good right now. So I'm going to remove this, and I'm going to try to remove all of this because I don't need it. I just wanted to just say the average, I'll say average of unit price, or average unit price for an example. So I'm just going to leave it as average unit price, and I'm going to add a space between those. So we have it like that. And again, if we go back to data format and make sure that we add the format options, actually add the currency, leave it at South African rands, so that's 26 rands, and so forth. And it seems like we have a value in the middle that actually doesn't look pretty well. You know, we have extra decimal points there. So in this case, I'm just gonna add decimal places to be 2, right? So that's how you can be able to do that and just get rid of that because it wasn't looking too well on that. Okay, bear with me here. We're almost done with these visuals that we're gonna have at the top that will allow us to make sure that we have everything looking nice for our visualization. So the next thing that we need to add now is a visual that will allow us to slice through the visualizations or slice through the report based off of the product line that is being sold or that we're making business with using Contoso. So when I say slice through, it gives me an idea that we actually need to add a slicer. So if I can find the slicer here on the visualizations pane, if I'm not mistaken, I'll be able to find it, and I'm just going to drag it to where I actually need it. And on the slicer, right? So on the slicer, what I need is to actually just add the product line visual. So in this case, we will just go and select product line or just drag and drop product line here. And then obviously right now it's just check boxes. And if you don't want it to look like this, you can be able to just go to the, again, format your visual on the visualizations pane. You go to the slicer settings and you change the style from vertical list to actually becoming a drop down. Then everything else, again, remember the effects. We add those effects that we need so that it can be a uniform experience for the entire report. We add rounded corners, and then we just make sure that everything just looks proper. Great. We have the first part of our report working. Now let's actually get into the meat of the report, which is looking at the revenue generated by customers and so forth, right? So the first one is the top number of customers based off of the revenue they generate or the revenue that they bring in. So to do that, we're going to add, if I'm not mistaken, we're either going to add a clustered bar chart, or we're going to add a stacked bar chart. In this case, we're going to add a clustered bar chart so that we can be able to do that. And then I'm just going to drag it here and just make it a little bit bigger. So in this case, we want to look at the top 5, we'll say top numbers, or we'll say top 5 number of customers based off of the revenue that they actually generate for us. So in this case, what we're going to do is we need to provide these values for the y-axis and the x-axis. So for the y-axis, we are going to add the customer name. So we're going to drag the customer name. And then for the x-axis, we are going to drag the sales, right? We could use revenue, but in this case, I'm just going to use the sales because that's the one that I actually used, and it seemed like it actually gives me accurate information. So I'm gonna drag the cells there, and it gives me like a total number of customers. But if I were to drag this, you can be able to see all of the customers here. So how do we actually solve this problem? So to solve this problem, what we need to do is to actually go to the filters, if I'm not mistaken. And we are going to the filters and we're going to look at the top 5 customers, so top number of customers. So on the filters pane, we select customer name. We change the filter tab from basics filtering to top number or top n, and then in this case we say top 5, and again we drag the sales, and then we just apply the filter. Now you can be able to see that we actually just see the revenue generated by the top 5 customers there. So I'm just going to make this a little bit smaller because I think I might need the space here at the bottom. But we'll see. We'll see as we go along. Okay, now again, per tradition, we make sure that everything looks the same or has a uniform look. So we go back, we select the visual for the top customers, go to general, go to the effects, and then toggle these guys on, which is the visual border and the shadow, and make the rounded corners there to be 15, and that should look a bit proper, a little bit as if that's something that we're actually looking at. Now, Contoso Retails also wants to look at the total revenue generated by each region. So they have 3 regions, or they have a number of regions where they have business in. So they want to see the total revenue generated by each of the regions that they actually have. So to do this, again, we can still add another clustered bar chart, and it will just be added right in there. So I'm just going to try and just minimize that, even though it doesn't look as user-friendly as I want it to be, but it's fine. So we're gonna add it in here, and now all we need is to actually say our y-axis being the region. So we have a column called region, so we're gonna drag this on y-axis, and then again sales being the x-axis, because we're trying to look at the sum or the total sales by each region, or the total revenue generated by each region. And then right after that, again, we just make sure everything looks the way that we want to look at in the report. Go to general, select effects. I like making things a bit user friendly, so I'm gonna change again and add the rounded corners. So if you're in this step and maybe you're going along and you're trying this out yourself and you're trying to follow along, just know that what you did for the first visual in terms of the effects and how it looks, you will actually do it for everything that is on the report that we're actually building. Okay, cool. So now we have it like that, and we have sum of sales. We might come back here and look and put the currents back in, but right now we're just gonna continue with the rest of the visuals in the interest of time. Cool. Now the next visuals, I think we have like 2 or 3 more. The next visuals that we need is a table that will allow us, or a visual that will allow us to compare the total revenue generated by each quarter in each year, so that they can be able to see which year did they perform well, or which quarter in which year performed well. So to be able to do that, we need to add a visual, and this visual will allow us to do that. In this case, we're going to add a matrix visual, and this matrix visual will allow us to actually do that. So what we're going to do, we need to provide the rows and then the columns. The rows in this case, the first row is going to be quarter, because we're trying to look at the quarter. And quarter is coming from the exported D month. Remember, we switched around the columns when we were ingesting this data. So I'm going to use the quarter ID because that's the one that has the quarter name, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm going to drag quarter ID inside of the rows. And then after that, what I'm going to do is I need to provide the month of the year, because obviously in that quarter, I want to be able to see which months so that I can compare the sales. So in that quarter, compare the sales for each month, and also compare the sales for each month in that quarter for each year. I don't know if that makes sense. So the next thing that I need to do is to just drag the order date, and I hope it's still a date format. So drag the order date, and in this case, if you don't want to do it the way that I did, you could just remove quarter ID, and then you just have quarter like this provided as part of your order date. But in this case, I'm just using quarter ID. I might explain this a bit later on. So I'm going to remove day, and I'm going to remove quarter, I'm going to remove year. I'm just going to leave month, so that if we click this plus here on the visual, we can be able to see the months. Cool. And then for columns, it's just basically year, because for columns, you just want to see the year, right? So 2003, 2004, 2005. And then the rest of the values that we need is just basically the revenue, which would be sales in this case. And we are able to see that sales actually looks like this. And then you can allow Contoso to be able to expand a little bit like this, and they can be able to see the revenue generated. Obviously, we still need to format this a little bit proper. Right. Okay. So let's add something that's going to look a bit nice. But obviously it needs to make sense as how you're doing it. But in this case, it's not making sense. I'm just doing a demo for you. Let's add a little bit something that's going to look nice for this visual. So we're going to add something called conditional formatting on the revenue generated. So we're going to click on that drop down and then select conditional formatting, and then we're going to select data bars in our case. Right now, we're just looking at the data bars, and we're looking at, let's say, you could say the lowest value, and then you put the color blue. But in this case, let's say you put something that is custom, and we say maybe the lowest value is 1 million or 100,000 for an example. So I'm going to put 100,000, so a random value. And then the negative bar, I'm just going to make it something that looks like red. And then again, here, instead of highest, it will be custom. And then I am going to put, I think this is 2,500,000 if I'm not mistaken. So I put that and I'm select OK. Then our data bar actually our matrix starts looking like this. So you do this when you want to show the sales revenue performance, let's say based off of the values that you're given for your requirements for that specific visual. But I can explain this a little bit more later on, but you would do this and it will make your visual to look a little bit proper or accurate in terms of representing your data based off of a range that you're provided with to show the sales performance or to show the performance of the sales generated, for an example. So you could do it like that. Then the rest of the stuff that we need to do is to just make it look a little bit pretty. So you're going to go back to the visualization, select format your visual, go to effects and toggle visual border on and shadow on, add a rounded corner of 15 pixel, and that should do it. The other thing that I want to do is to actually remove I think, if I'm not mistaken, I want to remove the totals. I don't know whether I'm removing the right totals because I don't want that total really, but it's up to you if you ever want to showcase it. Yes, that's the total that I don't want. So I don't want that total, and maybe this is how my visual is supposed to look like and so forth. So I'm just going to leave it at this and maybe just make it a little bit smaller, and then people can just scroll down to actually view the values properly. And then maybe if I make it a little bit bigger, it'll be fine. Cool. Then the next thing that we need to add is to look at the total orders and revenue over time. So what's the performance, or what's the relationship of the total orders and revenue generated over a period of time? So for us to be able to do that in Power BI, what you can use is something called, I think it's called a line and stacked column chart. So in this case, we're going to add a line and stacked column chart, which will add it a little bit towards the bottom here. And then we're just going to expand it a little bit so that it can fit perfectly. And then in this case, for the x-axis, we just add order date. We'll have all of the details that we need, so we don't necessarily need day. And then for the column y-axis, we're going to add our measure, the number of orders, because we're looking at the total orders and revenue and their relationship over time. And then for the line y-axis, we're going to look at the revenue generated, which will be the sales in our case. And then the column legend, we can still do it for quarter. For an example, we can use quarter as a legend so that we can be able to see the revenue generated. So I'm going to go grab quarter ID because that's the one that actually has the quarter name. So we'll have it like that, and our visual will start looking a little something like this. Okay, we're almost done with this visual. Let's make it a little bit prettier. So go to general, go to the effects, toggle these on, and then we come in here, change rounded corners, make it to 15, and maybe just make this a little bit bigger. Ooh, I can't see my thing. There we go. So once that's a little bit bigger, and then you can be able to see that looks a bit nice. But you can always go to the next level in the hierarchy so that you can be able to see the data represented in a way. So for example, you can see I actually did a drill down based off of the quarter names and all of those things. Right, last visual to add, which will then be a map visual. So in this case, Contoso wants to actually visualize the data based off of the revenue generated by each country. At first, we looked at the total or the sum of sales by region, which is all of the countries grouped into one region. And now we want to look at each country and how much they actually generate in terms of revenue. So in this case, we are going to use the map visual. So we're going to add it on this little space here. So I just need to make sure that these are the same size, and then go here and we're going to add a map. This map, we just make sure that it fits into the space that we're left here, and we just expand, and then that should be fine. So now what we need to do is to provide the location. The location would be the country. So we just drag and drop the country from exported sales. And then the other thing would be sales, which would be the bubble size in our case, which is we're looking at the sum of revenue, for an example. And then, yeah, that's it. If, for an example, you wanted to do something creative, like changing the colors, like for example, you wanted the ones that generate the most revenue to be always blue, and then the ones that generate the least revenue to be always red, you could do something like, I think if I'm not mistaken, you could try and do some formatting for this specific visual to actually do that in this case. But in our case, we're not going to try to do that for now, because in the interest of time, the only thing that we will do is to just make it prettier so that it fit perfectly with everything else that is on our report. So I'm gonna toggle on the visual border, put on the rounded corners, and voila, you have a semi-functional, good-looking report that you can be able to use. And then the other thing that you can do now, because obviously these are just the standard colors, the other thing that we can do, for an example, I think if I'm not mistaken, we can be able to insert a text box somewhere, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm going to try to insert a text box here so that we will have a proper report. So I just want to move this here at the top, just drag it towards the end, and hopefully I can type this and say Contoso retail sales performance breakdown, right? And then we can always center this, change this to be maybe 32. Oh, I think I put the wrong font in the wrong place. So if I change this to be 32, hopefully it will do what I needed to do. And then you put it there, and I think that should do it. Yes, that should do it. And then maybe you could also add like a background color for this, a background color for this text box as well, or you could add something a little bit nice. So when you add a background color, again, go to effects, visual border. I love doing that. And then you make it 15 pixels, and then you'll have a nice visual border. Change the background color maybe to something blue. I don't think that's going to look good, but that's fine. So you have a report, looks nice. You can then publish it afterwards, and then you can save it, publish it, share it with everyone. And then the other neat thing that you can be able to do, now I'm just rambling on, that's the end of the demo really, but you could do other stuff as well. For example, on the view, you could change the theme if you don't like this blue one, in which I didn't like as well. I just need to find a theme that I actually use at some point. I think this is the theme, which is high rise. You change it, and it actually looks a bit nicer than that blue. I like this color. I like this color than the blue, because that color was just not doing it for me. Or we could change it to something better. If it's not high rise, if I'm not mistaken, you could put frontier, and then it adds a little bit dusty theme to it, and then it looks proper. Yeah, and then everything else that you can do, for an example, for this, you could, instead of it being sum of sales, you could come and rename this for this visual and say total revenue, for an example, and maybe you remove sales as well. But everything else, you could just edit it out. Total revenue by customer, or instead of it customer name, you could just rename it to be just by customer. Total revenue by customer. You change this as well. You add the currency like how I've shown you before, and you can be able to interact with the data. Like for an example, if we change the product line to motorcycles, you can then be able to see the values change to planes, to ships, to trucks and buses, for an example, or vintage cars, none of those things. And you can see the number of orders that are there, and then you can be able to see how the revenue is. But before I continue on, without ending this demo, I'm just going to stop there. And if you have any other questions regarding on how to build this report, just put it in the comments, and we'll be able to just answer that. And if you want access to this data set, we will probably put it on the description of this video, and you'll be able to have access to the sales table or sales CSV file, and you have access to the dimension table for the month and the quarter that we were able to use for all of those things. Other than that, that is how you build a Contoso retail sales performance breakdown report that you can then be able to publish into a Power BI dashboard, and they can be able to interact with the data like how we're already interacting with it and so forth. Like for an example, if you start choosing things, you will start seeing things happening on your report and so forth. But basically that's it, and you can get creative with this and make it much more prettier, but I will leave you with this. Thank you so much, and don't forget to subscribe.